In this episode, I unpack the coefficient of inbreeding, COI, and why it's become one of the most overused selling points in dog breeding. What does the percentage actually mean? How is it calculated? And does a low number really guarantee a healthier puppy? I explain where COI fits into the bigger picture, why it's only one piece of the puzzle, and how to spot when it's being used as a lazy shortcut instead of real knowledge. Welcome to the Bulldog Owners Podcast, where I host a passionate conversation about pedigree dogs. I'm Sarah, and here we cut through the myths and misinformation to talk honestly about life with bulldogs. Welcome back to another episode. Are you bored of me yet? Yeah, I've shook it up a bit. I've been doing walk and talks. I've been doing car chats. I've done interviews. You've had webinar extracts. You've had all the things, eh? It's another walk and talk. I've got Pearl and I've got Rita. Now, Pearl is a little bouncy. These two I can walk on extendables. But Pearl, to a degree, has, what would you call it, controlled fun on a flexi. I can walk these two together because Rita absolutely hates going for a walk. She stomps around with the most moodiest face on her. She doesn't stop and sniff anything. She doesn't do anything. She just looks thoroughly pissed off and just wants to get back indoors. So she is a total house dog. She likes a hired field where she can go crazy, and she likes all the agility equipment, but she hates road walking. But road walking is good for bulldogs because it's it just tones them up, gets them in really good muscle condition. But I digress. What are we chatting about today? I've realised I've mentioned quite a few episodes about inbreeding coefficients, and I thought this would be the episode to do it. So the reason I want to tell you about this is because there's two narratives. One that will push it as it's like the most important thing that exists in the world, and another that I align more with is that it's just another part of the jigsaw puzzle in finding and identifying a good breeder, but also a quality dog. What is inbreeding coefficient that you'll probably see online as COI? COI, so coefficient of inbreeding, or as I say, inbreeding coefficient. Now, I don't know who the very clever person was, but some who came up with the concept. But basically, they said if we do some very smart calculations, we can work out in a dog's lineage how much the same dogs appear or not, and express that as a percentage. So the higher the percentage, the more technically inbred your dog is. Now, the highest percentage you should be seeing would be 25%. So you're never going to see 100%, 55%. Caveat this with, the problem with the calculation is that it depends on how many generations of pedigree it's based on. So you can have a discrepancy of what that percentage is, because basically the less generations it's based on, the more likelihood your numbers are going to be higher, I believe. But I'm no mathematician, so don't quote me on that. But that in itself, unless everybody's agreed to say, let's run it on 3 generations or 5 generations or 7 generations or 10 generations, that's going to impact your percentage. So that's one anomaly to put out there straight away. But generally, I think the Kennel Club is 10 generations, but don't quote me. Years ago, you used to be able to register like a mother-son breeding or a father-daughter breeding or 4 litter mates breeding. Now, that was banned in my lifetime. Not many people, it wasn't the norm for people to do those types of breeding, but they did exist in the Kennel Club world. And that was because breeders either had a really small gene pool, so depending on your breed, some breeds are more popular than others. So obviously the more popular the dog, generally the bigger the gene pool, though realistically the breeding gene pool of any breed is actually quite small, because only small, not every dog gets bred from. So the gene pool is always smaller than the actual population of a breed. And then you think on top of that, depending on how easy or hard the breed is to breed, also impact how many of those are bred as well. So basically, there has been historically some breedings that have been quite close, that if you put a human lens onto it, you would deem totally inappropriate and incestuous. Now, why would a breeder do these types of breedings? And generally, it's the lock-in type. So I know I bang on about this quite a lot because I understand the breed standard and that I want my bulldogs to mimic the breed standard as much as possible. And so therefore, I am breeding a particular type. Now, type comes down to, at the highest level, you kind of think, if I saw a silhouette of that dog, that I'd be able to know what dog that was in its simplest form. And then it has nuances of, eye placement, ear placement, tail set, top line, shoulder placement, all sorts. But anyone doing that type of close breeding, which would be inbreeding, so anybody breeding that close, they're generally saying, I want to lock in my breed, this type of dog. You wouldn't continue to do that. You would then outcross, because you realise you've gone so close. You can't continue. It would be unethical, which some say that breeding itself would be unethical. That's why it's been banned with the Kennel Club now. But you wouldn't continue to do that, because that's when you'd have start seeing deformities. So you wouldn't see it on first generation. To be fair, when people were doing those type of breedings, this was before we had DNA testing. So without a doubt, what you'll find with these super close breedings is that you double up on the good, like the DNA, because they're so closely related. You're doubling up on the good things, but equally, you might be doubling up on the bad things. And we've talked lightly about DNA testing, and actually, like nowadays, we know we can look at a DNA result and breed away from breeding affected dogs. And you think back in the day when people were doing these close breedings, hopefully they knew their dogs weren't affected. Why would you be breeding an affected dog? But what they didn't know is whether they had two carriers. I know what you think. If you breed two carriers together, some of the pups would be clear, some of the pups would be carriers, some of the puppies would be affected. So you're really going to get a mishmash of results. Obviously, nowadays we can DNA test, so you can totally prevent any affecteds being bred, even if you was to do such a close breeding. But back in the day, they didn't have DNA testing so readily available. They really were risking it and going into the unknown. So what you find with these type of close breedings is that, so you had 4 pups, 2 pups would be phenomenal, and 2 pups totally wouldn't, and potentially could be a genetic car crash, even if they seemingly looked of a type on the outside. So the Kennel Club rightly said, no, we're not going to register such close breedings. However, you can still achieve a 25% breeding, or very close to, if you would like to breed, say, two half siblings, but then on the other side where they don't pair up so closely, so say they both had the same sire, say they didn't have the same dam, but say their dams were litter sisters. So on paper it's different pedigree names, but in reality the DNA is very similar. Then you're going to get quite a high coefficient, even though on paper it doesn't look totally shocking. It's not really obvious. It was like a father-daughter or mum and son breeding. So yeah, you can't register those close breedings, but you can register stuff that's quite similar. Now, why would someone do this? So looking at type, the problem you have is that the nature of the beast, the fact that you're breeding pedigree dogs, obviously your gene pool is restricted automatically, which, to be fair, I did sit on a geneticist webinar quite a while ago now, and he said, actually, even if you say you bred a Labrador to a poodle, in your head you think that would result in like a super, super low coefficient. But he was saying that these dogs, the foundations of these dogs, so that pairing, are still pedigree dogs. So actually, the genetic variation isn't as large as what you might think it would be. So even with crossbreeds, at the end of the day, they're still a dog, they're still a pedigree. So you're still working within a smaller window than the average, which makes the argument of crossbreeds a little bit laughable, because it's only going to do so much. The Kennel Club are already entertaining the idea that some pedigree dogs should be crossed, and they still deem them as pedigree dogs if after 2 generations of putting them back to the breed that they're meant to be. There's Leonbergers. There's been some work going on with that. It happened with the boxers, trying to get natural bobtails in. Might have even happened with Dalmatians. So there's little projects going on. So I said, well, if that happens, you're going to start getting the semantics, or like a play on words, but there will become a difference between a pedigree dog and a purebred dog, because then a purebred will be a dog that's only ever had its breed in its pedigree, where a pedigree dog will be a dog that's just registered with the Kennel Club. And obviously they're saying that by doing the crossbreeds, it's going to actually improve the health of the breed with whatever aspect they're doing the cross for to improve the breed, whether that be tail, genetics, I don't know, eyes, nose, all sorts, muzzle length, all sorts. Which, over my dead body, would I do that? So, if I start using the word purebred on my website, now then you'll know why. Pell's drinking out of puddles, which you shouldn't do. Shouldn't really let your dog drink out of puddles, even if it's rainwater puddles, because slugs have been across trails. They could pick up lungworm. And I've had a dog with lungworm because she drinks out of puddles. So she's always a no-go. But anyway, we digress. So the coefficients. I think the breed average for bulldogs at the moment on the Kennel Club website is 6.8%. And so what they're saying is that's a breed average. Ideally, you want to breed below that. And the reason that you want to breed below that is because you're going to get a healthier dog, which isn't true. So this is why I argue that this point quite strongly. Already had the conversation about how some breeders were using colour as like their USP, their marketing point as to why you should buy a puppy from them, because they were these amazing colours. Honestly, Rita's face is horrendous. She looks absolutely mortified that she's been brought out on a walk. Well, Pearl absolutely loves it. It cracks me up. But yeah, so some breeders, their USP, why their dogs were so special, was because it had a fancy coat colour. Show people, I guess, originally their USP was it's the most breeds typical bulldog you can get. It's going to look like a bulldog. And then your ownership has evolved, pet insurance, veterinary practices and care, and then health become much more on the agenda now. And that's constantly a big focus and should never not be. So one ways of improving health is that you reduce your coefficiency, because then you're saying there's less chance of the DNA being replicated that could potentially cause problems. But obviously, this is just lazy, isn't it? That's just a really lazy way to say that you might be breeding healthy dogs. Because surely, if you spent some money on your dogs and actually did the DNA testing, you would genetically avoid any problems anyway. And yes, there are many genetic conditions out there that there are not yet any tests for. Then you could argue just having a low COI would prevent some of the stuff we can't test for. But then what you could end up doing, and as what has happened, is that actually you put 2 dogs together that are low coefficient under your 6.8, but they could literally have no type. So their conformation and structure could be quite poor. They could have no breed type, like they look more like a boxer than they do a bulldog, but you get to plaster on your puppy adverts that they're low coefficient, and like some will advertise 0 coefficient, and that generally will happen when it's an imported dog that has either a bloodline totally isn't in the UK, or it hasn't been loaded into the system properly and it kicks out as a 0 coefficient. But if you look at the 2 dogs in front of you, it still doesn't mean that they are the best of their type. So I see people using this strategy as a lazy way to sell their dogs, because it doesn't mean that the dogs in front of them are healthy. They're just saying these dogs are so not related to each other that the puppies will have a 0 COI. And it might mean that you get a healthy puppy. It might not. So I don't like it, because it basically, a bit like with the IHA, it just dumbs down dog breeding. It's basically trying to remove that you need any knowledge to breed a dog, and that you're relying on a formula to convince people that you've bred a decent dog, which it doesn't actually mean that at all. So again, it is important. I don't believe that it should be totally disregarded. But I think I've mentioned like the juggling analogy, but we're just building a picture. And when you're breeding for the first time, and you might have a really nice healthy girl, she could be like fully like gold health tested, Boas 0, Patella 0, absolutely amazing dog. But you just don't know what the DNA is behind her. You don't know if you got a unicorn dog, you got lucky in the litter, no one else did, and then you're going to breed her to equally a dog that you go and find an amazing stud dog. You only know what the owners tell you. Like, sourcing a stud dog is really hard. You can see the stud ads, you can go online and look at the stud ad, but when you see that he's just a representation of his parents and the litter mates, if you never get to see parents or litter mates, you really don't know. So it makes it really difficult if you don't have the true generational knowledge behind your dogs. There's always a risk, basically. There's always a risk. And so this is why I kind of bleat on about going to a breeder that's just been around for time, a reputable breeder. Equally, as you've heard in other episodes that I've talked about, just because someone's been around for time doesn't mean they're up with current schemes that are available to them. So it's almost like they're not even using all the tools in their toolkit, which is a bit crazy. So you really do need to find, if you're looking for a puppy or even looking for a stud dog, you need to find someone that breeds but isn't stuck in their ways, like open-minded. They're willing to take on new information, new methods, new practices, even how they rear their pups. They're willing to take that on, and then they pick what's best for them. And as long as they can articulate to you why they have or haven't done something, and it's not a superficial answer, like obviously you can go, oh, well, no, dad's this or mum's that, or the breeder that got her from said that. Need to demonstrate knowledge to you, because you're spending a lot of money. And if they can't do that, then they're not the ones. They're definitely not the ones. You can't just say, I just bred her because she's just such an amazing family pair. Yeah, but that's amazing. Like we said, that confirms she's got awesome temperament, which is important. But what about her health? What about the health when she's bred to a stud dog that you don't really know much about, apart from what that person's told you? Again, coefficient is an indicator. It's a part of that jigsaw puzzle. But there's so much more to it, which is why, and I need to do an episode on my Star Puppy Plan. It's the 6 points that help you holistically cover all of the areas that you need to know about to buy a decent puppy, and the continual care of that puppy into adulthood. So I definitely will cover that. I hope I haven't confused you anymore. And that basically coefficient is the percentage of inbreeding. The breed average is 6.8. Forewarn you, I generally sit in the teens, and I've gone up to 20s, and I would say I'm a particularly health conscious breeder. So as I said, I use it as a tool, a bit of information, not much more than that, because if you're health testing all your dogs, there's more informative information out there. But it is just a good barometer, I suppose. But what I would be cautious of is if people are using their inbreeding coefficient as their main sales point, USP, for the puppies or the breeding that they've done, because it just means that they're struggling to understand anything more in depth about the breeding that they've done. So that's it. I'm back home. I'm going to sort these dogs out. For once, it's not raining, even though apparently it's rained every day this year in the UK. Yay! A way to start 2026. But hopefully you found that useful and it will help you identify type of breeders that are advertising and what they do or don't know about the breed. I'll catch up with you soon. Bye! Before you go, head over to bulldogownersclub.com if you fancy a bit of support with your dog, help finding a puppy, or joining one of our fortnightly informal chatty community calls.